The most notorious disappearance at Glenelg was when the Beaumont children went missing in 1966. But 53 years earlier, another resident vanished mysteriously, never to be seen again. At about 10 o'clock on the night of the 21st of May, 1913, Hilda Scott Broad said goodnight to her father and sister and went to bed at the family home at number 14 East Terrace, Helmsdale. East Terrace is today called Brighton Road, and Helmsdale is part of Glenelg East. Alfred Scott Broad was a noted artist, one of the first South Australian-born artists to contribute black and white illustrations to newspapers in Adelaide, Melbourne and Sydney. He was born in Adelaide in 1854 and studied at the South Australian School of Art. He contributed to the Adelaide Punch at the age of 14, and later the Quiz and the Lantern newspapers. He was also a talented watercolourist. One of his paintings is in the collection of the South Australian Art Gallery. As well as his artistic endeavours, he ran an import business. In Melbourne, while working for the Australasian Sketcher and the Illustrated Australian News in June 1884, he married Emmeline Fanny Ray. Emmeline was also an artist, an author of articles for newspapers, and also of a slim volume in 1911 titled The Sex Problem, a book about women steeped in a Victorian mindset of class division. Mrs. Scott Broad had been interviewed for a feature article by the Daily Herald in March 1913. A description of the home at Glenelg was given by the journalist, which reads, "By the open door we entered into a delightful room. The breath of the sea and the bright sunlight came through the windows. Beautiful pictures covered the walls, and many valuable art treasures rested upon tables and stands. The harmony of colour and arrangement, the peacefulness, the airiness, and sunshineness struck such a pleasant note that I agreed to the effect of atmosphere, that intangible reality to all artistic natures. The house, with its wide verandah all around, is situated in the newer part of Glenelg, so open and fresh that it seems almost in the country." Their children were Wilfred, who was working as a metallurgist in Broken Hill, and 3 daughters, Elsie, aged 22, Hilda, 19, and Mavis, who was 15, in 1913. Another son, Bertram, had died as a baby in 1888. Hilda was 5'7" tall, but slight, with large grey eyes, a Grecian nose and forehead, a firm chin and a long neck. Her hair was brown and her complexion fair. She was described as ambitious, and a girl who made big demands on life. Although she could be cold and aloof, she had a large circle of friends and many social interests. She had been educated at private schools and spent 5 years at the School of Design. She was associated with the Methodist Social Guild and the Congregational Church and Literary Society. Hilda was fond of music, reading and pictures. Like her father, she was making a living accepting commissions to create artworks. She was an expert at designing and making art leather bags. Some of her pictures adorned the walls of Helmsdale. Nothing seemed amiss, so when Hilda did not put in an appearance the following morning, her family went to check on the young lady. They found her bedroom door locked, but the window was open. The day before had been cool, reaching a top of 18 degrees Celsius, and the night was cold. Her bed had been somewhat disarranged, but it did not appear she had slept on it. The brightly coloured dress she had worn the day before was hanging up in her room. The window she must have climbed through faced another in a neighbour's house about 20 feet away. The people living there were not disturbed during the night, so it was assumed had somebody abducted Hilda and taken her through the window, some type of noise would have alerted them. It was a moonlight night, and anyone glancing out the window at the right time would have seen anybody there. Once in the backyard, Hilda could have left the property via a gate which led to an alleyway that ran behind the house, that joined the Bay Road and Augusta Street. Hilda's mother was away in Melbourne when her daughter went missing, but neither her father nor her sister, who were present in the house, heard anything unusual during the night. Although initially it was reported that Hilda had left the house in her nightwear, wearing only bedroom slippers and no hat, this was soon updated. Hilda was wearing a blue serge costume and a new set of wearing apparel. She was wearing a new pair of boots she had just purchased recently. 2 travelling costumes, a lace collar, a blue enamel brooch, a white muffler, and a comfortable hat were also found to be missing. A pair of gloves had possibly been taken as well. She had left behind her pince-nez glasses, a handbag which she habitually carried with her, her jewellery, and private letters. As she earned money from creating artwork, it was thought she may have had money not known to her parents. Her room was filled with artistic souvenirs, clothes and hats, including a hat she had bought only days before her disappearance, with money her mother had given her. Neighbours had noticed a car parked in the vicinity of the house for hours, which led to speculation that it may have been there to pick her up, or that somebody in it enticed Hilda away. There were 3 theories about what had happened to the girl. One, that she had chosen to commit suicide by drowning herself in the Patawalunga estuary, or in the sea off Glenelg. 2, that she had prearranged her departure from the house, but did not wish her family to know she was leaving, or where she was going. 3, that somebody abducted her. The police, when notified on the 22nd of May that Hilda was missing, considered the first possibility, and conducted a search of the sandhills and beach to find any clue that she may have drowned, either accidentally or otherwise. Hundreds of people living in Glenelg joined in the search, vainly seeking anything which could explain the mystery. After Hilda vanished, it was recalled that a day or 2 before she went missing, she had received a letter which had caused her great excitement. When it dropped through the letterbox in the door, her sister had gone to pick it up, but Hilda had pushed her aside and held the letter away from her. Although nobody knew who the letter was from, it was thought it might be from Clifford Pascoe. He was a young mining engineer who had met Hilda via his sister, and they had become friends. Pascoe had gone to work in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in February 1912. On the evening of the 22nd of May, a man thought he saw Hilda, despite the woman wearing a hat pulled down over her face and a collar turned up, as if trying to hide her identity, in Allison Street, not far from her home, and went to speak to her. The woman turned and quickly walked away. On the 26th of May, Alfred placed the first of several ads in the newspapers, asking for information about his daughter. On the same day, Mrs. Scott Broad was on her way to speak to a social worker at the Salvation Army headquarters in Adelaide about the possibility that white slavers, or human traffickers as they are now called, may have lured Hilda away and kidnapped her. Near the Methodist Church in Pirrie Street, a little dark-eyed lady with a pale face, pinched nose, and a hesitant manner, aged about 50, dressed in black, stopped her and asked her if she was Mrs. Scott Broad. She spoke in a refined manner. Having affirmed that she was, the woman told her that she knew that Hilda was alive and well. The young man was coming from Argentina to meet her. A girlfriend of Hilda's was encouraging her to do this, and the woman warned against this other young lady's incitement to rebelliousness. She knew all this because she had overheard the 2 young women discussing Pascoe. Emmeline desired to know the name of the mysterious informant and the equally mysterious friend, but the woman at first pretended not to hear, and then replied, "I must go now," and dodged away. Mrs. Scott Broad believed she may have been followed all the way from Glenelg, and speculated that the woman had access to Hilda, and maybe drugged her to gain the information. The head of the Salvation Army in Glenelg had told her that there was a man in Adelaide working as an agent for a gang of white slavers based in Melbourne. The gang was composed of well-dressed men and women who sought to lure attractive young females into a life of sin. The agent in Adelaide had recently advertised for the service of a young nurse, giving his address as a well-known high-class hotel. Mrs. Scott Broad had done some social work, apparently to reform women living scandalous lives, when living in Melbourne, and she wondered if this was a form of vengeance against her by a certain woman. She speculated that a girlfriend could have ingratiated herself with Hilda and written letters supposedly from Pascoe as a means to decoy Hilda from her room at night and have her abducted by others. Adelaide detectives stated that they had no evidence of white slave gangs operating in the city, and refused to search ships at Port Adelaide for Hilda, as she was over the age of 18 and free to go and do as she wished. Hilda's uncle, Fred Broad, who lived in Melbourne, said that it had been recently reported that a man had stopped a girl and given her a letter he said needed to be delivered urgently, but he had to catch a train and asked if she would oblige. The girl took the letter but didn't deliver it, taking it home with her. Her father decided to open it and found the note inside read, "If troublesome, chloroform her." Although there was no evidence of white slavers in Adelaide, the disappearance of Hilda provoked a moral panic that it might. Major MacLeod of the Salvation Army said that there were numerous instances of young women from England, and more particularly from Italy and France, lured to Western Australia, with promises of good jobs and forced into prostitution. MacLeod admitted he knew of no specific cases in Adelaide, but the group carried on a midnight rescue work when they visited brothels and hotels to try and induce any young girls they found to leave with them. Warnings were posted on street hoardings and railway stations, warning young women of this shadowy menace. More theories were considered, including that an older man had lured Hilda away with money to be his romantic interest, that she was suffering temporary insanity and was wandering Adelaide in a daze, and still the idea she had eloped to be with Clifford Pascoe held sway in many people's minds. Others conjectured that she had sleepwalked right off the end of Glenelg Jetty and drowned. Sergeant Riley of the Glenelg Police believed she had drowned, and he and his men daily searched the coastline from Glenelg to Henley to check if her body washed ashore. The police belief that Hilda had drowned may have been due to a number of cases of young women committing suicide around this time by drowning. A later suggestion in 1915 by a letter writer to a newspaper was that young women who had vanished might be being held prisoner by Roman Catholics in convents for some obscure reason. When the story about the woman in black in Perry Street was published on the 12th of June, a man residing on Henley Beach Road, Mile End, wrote to Mrs. Scott Broad, saying he believed the woman lived in a boarding house nearby. Hilda's mother went to the address with a journalist, but the woman was not home. She was invited to wait, and half an hour later the woman returned. Framed in the doorway was a woman dressed in black, with a pale face and a pinched nose. Emmeline's hopes soared. But then she realised the woman looked very similar, but she was not the same person. Around the time of Hilda's disappearance, a young woman with only a clumsily wrapped parcel as luggage arrived at one of the larger boarding houses and rented a room. She said she was a nurse and hinted she had been unwell and wished to recuperate by the seaside. After a few days, the young woman was suddenly gone, leaving behind only a blue hat and some green gossamer. Mrs. Scott Broad failed to identify either items belonging to her daughter, although she said Hilda had expressed a wish to be a nurse, but was unsuited for the calling. Further checking revealed the mystery girl had arrived at the boarding house at 9 p.m. on the 21st of May, when Hilda was still at home in Glenelg. In desperation, a psychic solution to the puzzle was sought. One of Hilda's brooches was handed to a clairvoyant, who said that the owner was going on a long voyage to a foreign country to meet a young man with foreign blood in his veins. They will be married and she will be very happy, and write to Mrs. Broad by the end of June. Her father, meanwhile, took a more pragmatic approach and contacted steamship companies to ascertain if anyone matching his daughter's description had booked a passage. 23 days after Hilda's disappearance, frustration was taken out on the police with accusations that they were indifferent and lackadaisical. The Daily Herald newspaper called on the state government to take some action instead. Clifford Pascoe had been cabled in Argentina. When the communication arrived, he was working for the General Electric Company in the country, 300 miles from Buenos Aires, but when he finally responded, his cable to his parents read, "Know nothing about it and heard nothing." On the same day in late June, in response to letters written by Alfred Scott Broad, the Canadian Australasian Royal Mail Line and the Oceanic Line searched their passenger lists, but could not find anybody corresponding to Hilda. A representative of the Royal Mail Line asked around all other shipping lines which went to South America as a courtesy. A passenger clerk in Sydney claimed that a woman in black, matching the description of the woman who had spoken in the street to Mrs. Scott Broad, had booked passage for two ladies to Buenos Aires with the New Zealand Shipping Company. The woman asked if they could use assumed names to travel, and were told that people sometimes did. On the 21st of June, Alfred met with the acting Premier of South Australia, Sir Richard Butler, to outline the case to him and ask for help. Alfred said he had been informed that a number of young women across Australia had vanished, believed lured away from their homes by unsavoury persons. He asked the state government to cable the British consul in Buenos Aires to be alert for the possible arrival of Hilda in that city's port on a steamer. Butler expressed his sympathy and promised to bring the matter before his colleagues to assess what they could do to help, which he did the following day. The police were instructed to communicate with authorities in Argentina about the case immediately. Despite all the leads and communications, nothing was discovered which led to Hilda. Further fears of white slavers were created by rumours. On the 28th of June, a Melbourne newspaper claimed that there had been 2 attempts to lure young women into a car by phoning them at work and telling them that their mother was sick and a doctor had said they must come home immediately. In the first instance, the young lady walked out of the building where she worked with a male friend, prompting those in the car to drive off. In the second case, the young lady refused to enter the car. Both times when they arrived home, their mother was healthy and well. Clifford Pascoe spent Christmas 1913 with his parents at their Sydney home, and through his father's solicitor, reiterated that he knew nothing of the matter at all. In 1915, Pascoe returned to Adelaide from Montevideo, where he had relocated in January 1914, and met with Hilda's parents. Her parents acknowledged that Pascoe was as oblivious as they were to what had occurred. He had not seen Hilda since January 1911, when she had paid a visit to his family in Sydney. The two wrote letters back and forth for some time, but there was never an engagement or talk of marriage. Pascoe left for South America in February 1912, and after he left Australia received no letters from Hilda. He himself had only sent 2 postcards, one in April 1912 and the second in November 1912, wishing her a happy new year, 1913. After 1915, the disappearance faded from the headlines and from the public consciousness. Hilda's father passed away on the 27th of April 1929, and her mother on the 27th of October 1933, without hearing from their daughter again. Her last surviving sibling, Elsie, died in 1968. The case was mentioned in a newspaper review of missing persons in 1941, but nothing new was learnt about the disappearance. The whereabouts of Hilda Scott Broad after the 21st of May 1913 have never been discovered.